Billionaire sat in first-class calm until his ex walked in, holding their smiling baby in her arms. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from, and once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Oh, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now, sit back and enjoy every detail. The leather seat in first class embraced Rohan Castell like an old friend. At 34, his tall, athletic frame still commanded attention wherever he went. His dark hair perfectly styled despite the early morning flight. His emerald eyes, which had charmed countless women across 3 continents, were focused on his phone screen as he scrolled through property listings in Monaco. The Castell tourism empire had made him one of the youngest billionaires in the luxury travel industry, but today felt different. Today he was flying to London not for business expansion, clear's throat, or another acquisition, but because his restlessness had reached a breaking point. 3 years of endless parties, exotic locations, and temporary companions had left him feeling strangely hollow. "Good morning, Mr. Castell," the flight attendant said with a practiced smile. "Can I get you anything before takeoff?" "Just coffee black," he replied, without looking up, his deep voice carrying the confident tone of someone accustomed to being served. Rowan adjusted his expensive watch and settled back into his seat, thinking about the London penthouse he'd just purchased. Another acquisition, another address to add to his collection of homes around the world. His mother had stopped asking when he'd settle down. His friends had given up trying to set him up, and he'd convinced himself that freedom was worth more than anything else. The boarding continued around him, a steady stream of well-dressed passengers claiming their first-class seats. He barely paid attention until he heard a baby's laugh. Bright, infectious, pure joy condensed into sound. That's when he looked up and froze. Delaney Wren stood in the aisle, 3 rows ahead, cradling a baby against her chest. Her honey blonde hair was shorter now, just touching her shoulders in soft waves, instead of the long cascade he remembered running his fingers through. She wore a simple navy sweater that hugged her curves modestly, paired with dark jeans and comfortable flats, practical travel clothes that somehow made her look more beautiful than any designer dress ever had. But it was her face that stopped his breath. Those warm brown eyes still held the same gentle intelligence that had first captivated him, though there was something new there, a depth, a quiet strength that hadn't existed before. Her skin still had that porcelain fairness with a hint of rose in her cheeks, and when she smiled down at the baby, the same dimple appeared on her left cheek. The baby, a little girl with wispy dark curls and the biggest blue eyes Rowan had ever seen, giggled again, her tiny hands reaching for Delaney's face. She was beautiful, probably around 9 months old, wearing a pink onesie with tiny elephants on it. Rowan's throat went dry. 3 years since their devastating breakup, since the final fight that had shattered everything between them. 3 years since he'd convinced himself he was better off without her quiet stability, her need for roots, her dreams of a simple life that had felt like a cage to his wandering spirit. Delaney hadn't seen him yet. She was focused entirely on settling the baby, checking her diaper bag, making sure everything was secure for takeoff. She moved with the careful efficiency of someone who'd learned to handle everything alone. A businessman in an expensive suit helped her lift her carry-on into the overhead compartment, and she thanked him with that same sweet smile Rowan remembered. But when the baby started to fuss, she handled it alone, bouncing gently and whispering soft reassurances. The sight hit him like a physical blow. Delaney, his Delaney, was a mother. His mind raced through possibilities, calculations, time. 3 years since their breakup, the baby looked around 9 months old. Plus 9 months of pregnancy meant she had moved on about 8 months after their split, found someone else, someone who gave her what she'd always wanted, built the life he hadn't been ready to give her. The plane began to taxi, and Rowan found himself gripping the armrest as his carefully constructed world tilted on its axis. All those nights in Dubai penthouses, all those parties on Ita beaches, all those beautiful strangers whose names he'd forgotten by morning, none of it had prepared him for this moment. Delaney finally looked back to check something in her bag, and their eyes met across the cabin. The recognition hit her like lightning. Her brown eyes widened, her lips parted slightly, and for a moment, she looked exactly like the 27-year-old woman who had walked out of his life, because she'd realized he would never choose her over his next adventure. The baby, sensing her mother's tension, looked around curiously until her bright blue gaze landed on Rowan. Instead of crying, she broke into the biggest smile, showing 2 tiny teeth, and waved her chubby hand at him, as if they were old friends. Rowan felt something crack open in his chest, something he'd spent 3 years carefully sealing shut. Delaney quickly turned back around, her cheeks flushed, clearly as shaken as he was, but the damage was done. The carefully maintained distance of 3 years had elapsed in an instant, leaving them trapped together at 30,000 feet with nothing but memories, regrets, and the sound of a baby's laughter filling the space between them. As the plane climbed toward the clouds, Rowan stared at the back of Dylan's head and wondered if fate had a sense of humor, or if it was just cruel enough to show him everything he'd lost exactly when it was too late to get it back. What happens when the past collides with the present at 30,000 feet? Will Rowan find the courage to face what he walked away from, or will 3 years of silence prove too much to overcome? The flight attendant's voice crackled through the intercom, announcing cruising altitude, but Rowan heard nothing beyond the thundering of his own heartbeat. For the past hour, he'd been stealing glances at Delaney, watching her natural grace as she cared for the baby, Emery. He'd heard her whisper the name during a brief crying spell. Delaney moved with the fluid confidence of motherhood, anticipating the baby's needs before they became urgent. When Emery dropped her stuffed elephant, Delaney caught it midair without looking. When the little girl grew restless, Delaney produced a quiet toy from seemingly nowhere. Every gesture spoke of a woman who'd learned to navigate the world alone, carrying both herself and her child with quiet dignity. The businessman beside her, a silver-haired man in his 50s, had struck up conversation. Clearly charmed by both mother and baby, Rowan watched Dylan's polite responses, the way she deflected personal questions while remaining gracious. She'd always been skilled at protecting her privacy, even with strangers. "Excuse me, sir." Rowan looked up to find the flight attendant standing beside his seat, concern creasing her brow. "You haven't touched your meal. Is everything all right?" He glanced down at the untouched plate of her broasted salmon. "I'm fine, just not hungry." But he wasn't fine. Nothing about the situation was fine. The woman he'd spent 3 years trying to forget was sitting 3 rows ahead, and every minute felt like torture. The Rowan Castell, who commanded boardrooms and closed billion-dollar deals, was reduced to a nervous teenager, unable to concentrate on anything but the curve of her neck, the gentle way she bounced Emery when the baby grew fussy. Then turbulence hit. The plane lurched violently to the left, sending drinks sliding across tray tables. Several passengers gasped, and Rowan instinctively gripped his armrests. But his eyes immediately found Delaney, who'd wrapped both arms protectively around Emery, shielding the baby with her entire body. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Folks, we're experiencing some unexpected weather. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." Another sharp drop made the plane shudder. This time, Emery started crying, not her usual cheerful babbling, but the scared wail of a child who sensed danger. Delaney tried everything, bouncing, shushing, offering toys. Nothing worked. The baby's cries grew louder, more panic. Other passengers began to look annoyed. The businessman beside her shifted uncomfortably. A woman across the aisle shot disapproving glances. Rowan watched Delaney's cheeks flush with embarrassment as she struggled to calm her daughter while fighting her own obvious fear of the turbulence. "I'm sorry," Delaney whispered to no one in particular, her voice barely audible over Emery's screams. "I'm so sorry." Rowan couldn't stand it anymore. Without thinking, he unbuckled his seatbelt and moved through the swaying cabin. Ignoring the flight attendant's protests about remaining seated, he reached Delaney's row just as another violent shake nearly sent him stumbling into her lap. "May I?" he asked quietly, extending his arms toward Emery. Delaney looked up at him with wide, startled eyes. For a moment, he thought she'd refuse. Then, another bout of turbulence hit and desperation won over pride. "She doesn't usually with strangers," Delaney began, but carefully transferred the crying baby to Rowan's arms. The moment Emery settled against his chest, something magical happened. Her cries began to soften. Rowan found himself naturally swaying despite the plane's erratic movement, humming a low, wordless melody he didn't even realize he knew. His large hands completely engulfed the baby's tiny frame, and somehow that seemed to comfort her. "There we go," he murmured, his voice taking on a gentle tone Delaney had never heard before. "You're okay, sweetheart. Just a little bump in the sky." Emery's blue eyes, still wet with tears, focused on his face with curious intensity. Her tiny hand reached up and grabbed his nose, which made him smile, a real, unguarded smile that transformed his entire face. "She likes you," Delaney said softly, her voice filled with wonder and something else he couldn't identify. "The feeling's mutual," Rowan replied, still swaying with Emery. The baby had completely stopped crying, now content to study this new, fascinating stranger, who somehow felt safe. The turbulence began to subside, but neither adult seemed to notice. They were lost in the surreal intimacy of the moment. Delaney watching the man she'd once loved hold her daughter. Rowan feeling something shift inside his chest as Emery's small hand curled around his finger. Her name's Emery, Delaney said, breaking the silence. Hello, Emery, Rowan whispered to the baby, who responded with a drooling smile. That's a beautiful name. She's usually shy with men, Delaney admitted, her voice catching slightly, but she seems to trust you. Their eyes met over the baby's head, and 3 years of separation seemed to compress into a single electric moment. All the hurt, the regret, the what-ifs hung in the air between them like unspoken words. She's perfect, Rowan said, and Delaney wasn't sure if he was talking about Emery or remembering something else entirely. The plane leveled out, and the captain announced that they'd cleared the rough weather, but the emotional turbulence in row 3A was just beginning. I should probably, Rowan started to hand Emery back, but the baby whimpered in protest, her little fingers clutching his shirt. She doesn't want to let go, Delaney observed, her voice soft with amazement. Neither do I, Rowan admitted before he could stop himself. The words hung between them, loaded with meaning. Neither was ready to unpack. Dellen's breath caught, and for a moment, they weren't two people who'd lost each other 3 years ago. They were just a man and a woman sharing the simple miracle of a baby's trust. Finally, reluctantly, Rowan transferred Emery back to her mother. But as he returned to his seat, he could still feel the phantom weight of the baby in his arms, the unexpected tenderness that had bloomed in his chest, and Dellen's grateful, confused gaze, following him down the aisle. For the first time in 3 years, Rowan Castell wondered if he'd been living the wrong life entirely. 2 hours passed in careful silence. Rowan tried to focus on his laptop, scrolling through acquisition reports that suddenly seemed meaningless. Every few minutes, his gaze drifted to Delaney, who was reading a paperback novel, while Emery napped against her chest. The domestic scene stirred something profound in him, a longing he'd spent years burying under endless travel and meaningless conquests. When the flight attendant announced they were beginning their descent into London, Emery woke up cranky and hungry. Delaney discreetly began preparing a bottle, but her hands trembled slightly as she measured the formula. The baby's increasing fussiness drew disapproving looks from nearby passengers. Rowan made his decision. He approached their row again, this time more slowly, less urgently than during the turbulence. Would you like some help? Delaney looked up, exhaustion evident in her brown eyes. I don't want to impose. You've already done so much. You're not imposing. He gestured to the empty aisle seat beside her. May I? She hesitated for a heartbeat, then nodded. As he settled beside her, the familiar scent of her perfume, something light and floral, hit him like a memory made tangible. She smelled exactly the same, and for a moment, he was transported back to lazy Sunday mornings in his Chicago penthouse when she'd curl up beside him with coffee and whatever book had captured her attention. Here, he said, taking the bottle and testing the temperature on his wrist with practiced ease that surprised them both. Perfect. Delaney stared at him. How do you know how to do that? Rowan's expression grew thoughtful. My sister Cassandra had twins 2 years ago. I've spent more time with babies than you'd expect. He paused, meeting her gaze. I've learned a lot about myself in the past 3 years. She accepted the bottle with a soft thank you and began feeding Emery, who immediately settled into contented silence. The intimacy of the moment, sitting so close, caring for a child together, felt both foreign and achingly familiar. She's beautiful, Rowan said quietly, watching Emery's tiny hand curl around the bottle. She has your eyes, well, the shape of them. Her father had blue eyes, Delaney said, her voice carefully neutral. She got the color from him. The words created a sudden tension. Rowan felt a stab of something he couldn't quite name. Jealousy, regret, curiosity. He must be proud. Delaney's hands stilled on the bottle. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He would have been past tense. Rowan's mind raced through the implications, but something in her tone warned him not to push. Instead, he simply said, I'm sorry. They sat in comfortable silence as Emery finished her bottle. Then, Delaney did something that surprised him. She shifted the baby toward him. Would you mind burping her? She seems to like you. Taking Emery felt as natural as breathing. Rowan positioned her against his shoulder, patting her back with gentle circular motions. The baby immediately relaxed into him, her tiny body warm and trusting against his expensive suit jacket. You're good at this, Delaney observed, and there was something wistful in her voice. I never thought I would be. he admitted. 3 years ago, I would have run screaming from this situation. What changed? The question hung between them, loaded with subtext. Rowan considered his words carefully. I did. At least I think I did. I started wondering if all the things I thought I wanted were actually just things I was running toward because I was afraid to stand still. Delaney turned to study his profile. His strong jaw was still the same, but there were new lines around his eyes. Laugh lines, but also something deeper. Worry lines maybe, or regret. You look different, she said softly. Older, more settled, quieter. She paused. You used to fill every silence with plans for the next adventure. Now you're just here. Rowan felt Emery's little body relax completely against him as she fell back asleep. Maybe I finally figured out that some moments are worth staying still for. The weight of his words settled between them. Delaney felt her heart skip, remembering the man she'd fallen in love with. Underneath all his restless energy, this version of Rowan Comer, more present, was someone she'd only glimpsed in rare, unguarded moments during their relationship. The penthouse in Chicago, she said suddenly. Do you still have it? Yes, though I'm rarely there. He hesitated. I kept thinking I should sell it, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. She knew why. That penthouse held their entire relationship. Lazy mornings in his kitchen, wine tastings on the terrace, fights about his upcoming trips, passionate reconciliations that never quite fixed the underlying problem. It was where she'd realized she loved him, and where she'd finally accepted that love wasn't enough if only one person was willing to stay and fight for it. I used to imagine what would have happened if I'd asked you to come with me, Rowan continued quietly, to all those places, all those adventures you did ask. Delaney reminded him, her voice barely above a whisper. Multiple times. No, I asked you to follow me. That's different. He looked directly at her, his emerald eyes intense. I should have asked you to build something with me instead of expecting you to just tag along for my ride. The honesty in his voice took her breath away. This was the conversation they'd never had 3 years ago. The understanding that had come too late. Delaney, he began, then stopped, seeming to wrestle with something. What? Are you happy? The question was simple, but his voice was full of complex emotions. Really happy? She looked down at Emery, sleeping peacefully in his arms, then back up at his face. For a moment, she considered lying, giving him the easy answer that would keep her safe. Instead, she found herself telling the truth. I'm content, she said carefully. I have Emery, and she's everything to me. I have a good life, quiet, stable, exactly what I always wanted. That's not what I asked. Their eyes met and held. In that moment, 3 years of careful healing, of building a life without him, of convincing herself she'd moved on completely, threatened to crumble under the intensity of his gaze. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our final descent into London Heathrow, the captain announced, breaking the spell. Rowan carefully transferred Emery back to Delon's arms, his fingers brushing hers in the exchange. The contact sent electricity shooting up her arm, and she knew from the way his breath caught that he'd felt it, too. As they buckled their seatbelts for landing, neither spoke, but something fundamental had shifted between them during the flight. The careful distance they'd maintained was gone, replaced by a dangerous intimacy that made them both remember exactly why they'd fallen so hard for each other in the first place, and why it had hurt so much when it all fell apart. The wheels touched down at Heathrow with a gentle bump, but Rowan's heart was anything but settled. As passengers began gathering their belongings, he found himself moving with deliberate slowness. Unwilling to let this unexpected reunion end, Delaney was methodically packing Emery's diaper bag. Her movements efficient but careful, as if she too was reluctant to break the spell that had formed between them during the flight. Let me help with that, Rowan said, reaching for her carry-on in the overhead compartment. You don't have to. I want to. Their eyes met as he lowered her bag, and the simple exchange felt loaded with meaning. Emery, now fully awake and alert, reached for Rowan as they prepared to deplane, her little arms stretching toward him with the innocent trust that had captivated him from the beginning. She really has taken to you, Delaney murmured, a mix of wonder and concern in her voice, as they walked through the jet bridge, Rowan carrying both their bags while Delaney held Emery. They must have looked like any other family returning from vacation. The thought struck them both simultaneously, creating an awkward awareness of how natural it felt. Heathrow's Terminal 5 bustled around them with the controlled chaos of international travel. Rohan had navigated this airport hundreds of times, But today, everything felt different. He wasn't rushing toward his next destination. He was desperately trying to slow down time. "Where are you staying?" he asked as they walked toward baggage claim, trying to keep his voice casual. "A small hotel in Bloomsbury. Nothing fancy." Delaney shifted Emery to her other hip. "I'm here for a literary conference. 3 days, then back to Portland." "Portland?" Rowan stopped walking. "You moved to Portland?" She nodded, not meeting his eyes. "About a year ago, after she trailed off." Then seemed to gather herself. It felt like time for a fresh start. "After what?" Rowan wanted to ask, but something in her tone warned him away from pushing. Instead, he filed away this new information. Delaney had left Chicago, left everything familiar, and started over in Portland. With a baby alone, they reached the baggage carousel, and Rowan found himself hoping her luggage would take forever to appear. Every moment felt precious, borrowed time he hadn't expected to have. "That one." Delaney pointed to a modest black suitcase. Rowan retrieved it effortlessly, his mind racing. In a few minutes, she would walk away again, and this time he might never see her. The thought felt unbearable. "Delaney," he began, then stopped. What could he possibly say? "Don't go. I've missed you every day for 3 years. I think I made the biggest mistake of my life when I let you walk away. I should get to my hotel," she said quietly, sensing his struggle. "Emery needs a proper nap, and I have registration tonight." Of course, he handed her the suitcase handle, their fingers brushing in the exchange. "Which hotel?" "The Gresham." Rowan knew it. A boutique hotel popular with academics and writers, comfortable but not luxurious. Exactly the kind of place Delaney would choose. Practical, charming, with character. They stood there in the middle of the busy terminal, neither quite able to take the first step toward goodbye. Travelers flowed around them like water around stones, but they remained frozen in their small bubble of uncertainty. Emery, sensing the tension between the adults, began to fuss. She reached for Rowan again, whimpering when Delaney didn't immediately move closer to him. "She's going to miss you," Delaney said softly, and there was something in her voice that suggested she wasn't only talking about the baby. "I'll miss her, too." Rowan's voice was rough with emotion. "Both of you." The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was quite brave enough to cross. 3 years of carefully built walls were crumbling, but the fear of being hurt again kept them both paralyzed. "Rowan," Delaney started, then shook her head. "This is complicated. It doesn't have to be." "Yes, it does." Her brown eyes filled with a pain that went deeper than their old breakup. "You don't understand. My life now, it's not what you think. I can't just." She stopped, struggling with words. "Then help me understand." For a moment, he thought she might. Her lips parted as if she was about to explain everything. Where she'd been, what had happened, why she looked at him now, with such careful guardedness, mixed with undeniable longing. Instead, she stepped back, clutching Emery closer. "I should go." "Wait." The word came out more desperate than he'd intended. "Let me drive you to your hotel, Rohan, please." He ran a hand through his hair, vulnerability cracking his polished exterior. "I know I have no right to ask for more time. I know I lost that right 3 years ago, but please just let me drive you to your hotel." Delaney searched his face, looking for something she wasn't sure she'd find. What she saw there, the genuine emotion, the careful hope, the man she'd once loved desperately trying to break through, made her heart ache. "Okay," she whispered. Relief flooded Rowan's features. "Okay," as they walked toward the exit. Emery babbling contentedly in Dellen's arms. Neither spoke about what this meant. They were both afraid that words might break whatever fragile truce they'd found. Rowan's driver was waiting with a sleek black Mercedes. The man, professionally discreet and efficient, quickly loaded Delaney's luggage while Rowan helped secure Emery's car seat, which he did with surprising competence. "You really have been around babies," Delaney observed. Impressed, despite herself, Cassandra insisted I learn, said I couldn't be Uncle Rowan if I was afraid to buckle a car seat. "Uncle Rowan," she repeated softly, and something in her tone made him look at her sharply. "What?" "Nothing. It's just I can picture that. You with children." She paused. "It suits you." As the Mercedes pulled away from Heathrow, London's skyline stretching before them, both Rowan and Delaney stared out their respective windows, lost in thought. Between them, Emery dozed peacefully in her car seat, completely unaware that her presence had just rearranged to adult lives in ways that would take time to fully understand. The drive to Bloomsbury would take 40 minutes in traffic, 40 minutes to figure out if this was goodbye forever, or if they were brave enough to try to find their way back to each other. 40 minutes to decide if love really did deserve a second chance. The Mercedes glided through London traffic with whisper-quiet luxury, but the silence inside was deafening. Rowan stared out at the familiar streets, Piccadilly, Oxford Circus, the elegant Georgian squares of Bloomsbury approaching, while stealing glances at Delaney in the rearview mirror. She was turned toward the window, her reflection ghost-like in the glass, one hand resting protectively on Emery's car seat. "You said you're here for a conference," Rowan finally asked, desperate to break the tension. "The International Literary Heritage Symposium." Her voice was carefully measured. "I'm presenting a paper on preservation techniques for 19th century manuscripts." Rowan smiled, despite the awkwardness, still saving old books. "Someone has to." For the first time since leaving the airport, she looked directly at him. "You used to tease me about spending my weekends in dusty archives." I was an idiot. The admission was quiet but fierce. "I thought adventures only happened in exotic places. I didn't understand that you were having your own adventures. Just quieter ones." Delaney's breath caught. This version of Rohan, reflective, humble, was so different from the restless man she'd known, that Rowan would never have admitted he was wrong about anything, let alone something so fundamental to who she was. "What changed?" she asked softly. Rowan was quiet for a long moment. "Honestly, I got tired of always moving, always chasing the next thing. I woke up in a 5-star hotel in Bangkok about a year ago, and I couldn't remember which country I'd been in the week before. I had everything I thought I wanted, and I felt completely empty." He paused, gathering courage for what came next. "I realized that all my adventures meant nothing because I had no one to share them with, not really share them, and the one person I'd wanted to share them with, I'd driven away because I was too scared to slow down long enough to build something real." Delaney felt tears prick her eyes. These were the words she'd needed to hear 3 years ago, but hearing them now felt like salt in a wound that had never fully healed. "Rowan," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "I know it's too late," he continued, his knuckles white where he gripped the seat. "I know you've built a life without me, a good life. I can see how strong you've become, how complete you are with Emery. I have no right to walk back into your world and stop." The single word cut through his rambling when he looked back at her. Tears were streaming silently down her cheeks. "You think I'm complete?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "You think I have it all figured out, don't you?" A bitter laugh escaped her. "Rowan, I'm a single mother living in a city where I know almost no one, working a job that barely pays my bills, and I haven't had a full night's sleep in 9 months. I'm held together by coffee, stubbornness, and the fact that this little girl needs me to be stronger than I actually am." Her honesty hung in the air between them like a confession. Rohan felt something crack open in his chest. Not just love, but fierce protectiveness, regret, and something else he couldn't name. "Then, why Portland?" he asked gently. "Why so far from everything familiar?" Delaney closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, they held a pain so deep it took his breath away. "Because staying in Chicago would have killed me." The words were said so quietly he almost missed them, but the weight of them hit him like a physical blow. "What happened, Delaney?" She looked down at Emery, who was sleeping peacefully despite the emotional storm swirling around her. "His name was Oliver," she said finally. "Oliver Manning. I met him at the library where I worked. He was researching his doctoral thesis on Victorian poetry." Rowan felt jealousy twist in his stomach, but he forced himself to listen. "He was everything you weren't," she continued, not looking at him, steady, present. "He brought me coffee every Tuesday when he came into work. He listened when I talked about preservation techniques. He thought my quiet life was perfect, exactly as it was." Each word was a knife twist, but Rowan remained silent, understanding instinctively that this was important, that she needed to tell the story. "We dated for 8 months before he proposed. Nothing dramatic or grand, just a quiet dinner at home, a simple ring, and a promise to build something beautiful together." Her voice grew softer. "I said yes because I loved him, but also because he felt safe. After you, I needed safe." Rowan closed his eyes briefly, the implications of her words hitting him hard. "We planned a small wedding for that October. I was happy, Rohan, really happy. Different than I'd been with you. Calmer, more settled, but genuinely content." She paused, gathering strength. "Then I found out I was pregnant." The car stopped at a red light, and in the sudden stillness, Rowan could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. "We were over the moon." Oliver immediately started talking about converting the spare room into a nursery. about teaching our daughter to love books as much as we did. He was going to be such a good father. Her voice broke on the last word, and Rowan knew with horrible certainty where this story was leading. What happened? He asked, though he dreaded the answer. December 15th, I was 32 weeks pregnant. Oliver was driving home from the university. He'd been working late on his dissertation defense. Her hands were shaking now. A drunk driver ran a red light on Lakeshore Drive. Rowan felt the bottom drop out of his world. Delaney, he died instantly. They told me that was a mercy, that he didn't suffer, but all I could think about was that he was probably planning what to read to the baby that night. He'd been reading to her every evening, even though she wasn't born yet. Tears were flowing freely now, and Rowan wanted nothing more than to pull her into his arms, but the car seat between them felt like an ocean. Emery was born 6 weeks later, January 30th. She came early because of the stress, the grief. I held her for the first time in the same hospital where they'd pronounced Oliver dead, and I didn't know if I was strong enough to love her without him. But you were, Rowan said fiercely. You are. Some days, she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Some days I barely manage. That's why I moved to Portland. Everything in Chicago reminded me of what we'd planned, what we'd lost. I needed to start over somewhere that didn't have ghosts on every corner. The Mercedes pulled up in front of the Gresham Hotel, but neither of them moved to get out. Rowan turned in his seat to face her fully, his heart breaking for everything she'd endured. I'm so sorry, he said, and the inadequacy of the words was painful. I'm so sorry you went through that alone. I wasn't completely alone. I had Oliver Unk's parents, some friends from work, but it wasn't. She trailed off, then looked directly at him. I needed you. When Oliver died, when Emery was born, during all those long nights when I thought I was drowning, I needed you, and you weren't there. Her words hit him like a physical blow, not an accusation, just truth, raw, painful truth. If I had known, you would have what? Dropped everything and come running. Her smile was sad, understanding. Maybe you would have, but the point is, you didn't know because we'd cut each other completely out of our lives. And that was probably for the best, because 3 years ago you couldn't have handled this, the responsibility, the grief. The way love sometimes means staying in one place and fighting through the hardest days, instead of running toward the next adventure. Rowan sat in stunned silence, absorbing the magnitude of what she'd shared. Delaney had loved someone else, lost him tragically, had his baby alone, and rebuilt her entire life from scratch. She was right. 3 years ago, he would have been useless to her. But now he wanted nothing more than to prove that he could be the man she and Emery needed. The driver cleared his throat discreetly. Shall I get the luggage, sir? Reality crashed back around them. Delaney began gathering her things, the moment of raw honesty, shifting back into careful politeness. Thank you for the ride, she said formally, and for listening. But as she reached for the door handle, Rohan caught her hand. This can't be goodbye again, he said urgently. Not now, not after. Rowan, have dinner with me. Tonight, please. She stared at him, conflict clear in her brown eyes. I can't. The conference. After the conference, late dinner. We'll find somewhere quiet, familiar. Bring Emery. He squeezed her hand gently. One dinner, Delaney. That's all I'm asking. She looked down at their joined hands, then at Emery, then back at his face. For a moment, he thought she'd refuse. One dinner, she said finally. But this doesn't change anything. I can't go backwards, Rowan. I won't. I'm not asking you to go backwards, he replied, his voice intense with conviction. I'm asking for the chance to show you who I am now, who I became after I lost you. As she stepped out of the car with Emery in her arms, Delaney felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. She'd spent 3 years protecting herself, building a safe, predictable life for her and her daughter. But seeing Rowan again, hearing the pain and growth in his voice, watching him care for Emery with such natural tenderness, it was making her remember the woman she'd been before. Grief had changed everything, and that terrified her almost as much as it gave her hope. The Gresham Hotel's lobby was exactly what Delaney had expected. Understated elegance with worn leather chairs, towering bookshelves, and the quiet hum of intellectual conversation. It was the kind of place Oliver would have loved, she thought, then immediately chastised herself for the comparison. She'd spent 3 years trying to stop measuring every moment against what he would have thought, what he would have done, but seeing Rowan again had stirred up everything she'd carefully buried. Welcome to the Gresham, Ms., and the desk clerk said warmly. We have your reservation for 3 nights. And might I say, what a beautiful baby. Emery, still sleepy from the car ride, offered the clerk a dreary smile that made the young man's day. Delaney felt the familiar surge of fierce maternal love mixed with exhaustion that had become her constant companion. "Thank you. Could you also arrange for a crib to be sent to the room?" "Of course. Is there anything else we can help you with this evening?" Delaney almost asked about nearby restaurants suitable for dinner with a baby, then caught herself. She hadn't actually committed to dinner with Rowan. She'd said one dinner in a moment of weakness, overwhelmed by his transformation and the memories he'd stirred up. But now, in the sensible quiet of the hotel lobby, doubts were creeping in. Their room was on the 4th floor, small but charming, with a view of Russell Square. Delaney set Emery down on the bed and began unpacking with mechanical efficiency, her mind racing. What was she doing? She had a presentation to give tomorrow, research to review, a life to get back to in Portland. Getting involved with Rowan again was emotional suicide. But the way he'd held Emery, the tenderness in his voice when he'd apologized, the genuine pain in his eyes when she told him about Oliver. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. "It's Rowan. I got your number from the hotel. I hope that's okay. Dinner at 8 o'clock. I found a place called Profanani in Bloomsbury. Family friendly, quiet, excellent reviews. No pressure if you've changed your mind." Delaney stared at the message for a long time. The fact that he'd researched family-friendly restaurants, that he'd given her an out, that he'd signed it simply the way he used to when they were together. It all felt like careful consideration for who she was now, not who she'd been 3 years ago. Emery crawled across the bed toward her, babbling happily and reaching for the phone. Delaney scooped her up, studying her daughter's face, those blue eyes that had come from her father, but the nose that was definitely Wren family, and the stubborn chin that Delaney recognized from her own baby pictures. "What do you think, sweetheart?" she whispered to Emery. "Should Mama take a chance on an old friend?" Emery responded by grabbing Dylan's hair and attempting to eat it, which wasn't particularly helpful advice. Delaney's fingers hovered over her phone. The smart thing would be to decline politely, attend her conference events, fly back to Portland, and pretend this day had never happened. The safe thing. Instead, she found herself typing, "Profani sounds lovely. 8 p.m. works. Thank you for thinking of Emery D." The response came within minutes. "Thank you for saying yes. I won't waste this chance." Across London in his penthouse overlooking Hyde Park, Rowan was experiencing his own crisis of confidence. He'd spent the afternoon in meetings he couldn't concentrate on, his mind replaying every moment of their conversation in the car. The pain in Delon's voice when she'd told him about Oliver, the way she'd said she'd needed him during the worst period of her life. He'd failed her once by being too selfish and immature to see what he was losing. He couldn't afford to fail her again. His assistant, James, knocked on the office door. "Sir, the restaurant confirmed your reservation for this evening. Private corner table, high chair available, and they've assured me their kitchen can accommodate any dietary restrictions for the baby. Perfect. Thank you, James." Rowan loosened his tie, feeling uncharacteristically nervous. "And the other thing I asked about, the florist delivered everything to Fanny as requested. Simple, understated, exactly as you specified." Rowan had spent an hour on the phone with the restaurant and florist, trying to strike the right balance. He wanted to show Delaney that this meant something to him, without overwhelming her. White roses, not red, too presumptuous, arranged simply on their table, thoughtful, but not desperate. At least he hoped it wasn't desperate. He showered and changed into dark jeans and a navy cashmere sweater, dressed up, but not intimidating. The last thing he wanted was for Delaney to feel like this was some high-pressure business meeting. This was about them, about who they could be now. As he drove through London's evening traffic, Rowan thought about everything that had led to this moment. 3 years of wandering, of trying to fill the Delaney-shaped hole in his life with adventure and acquisition. The gradual realization that success meant nothing without someone to share it with. The painful acceptance that he'd let the best thing in his life slip away because he'd been too afraid to stop running long enough to build something real. But tonight felt different. Tonight felt like possibility. Back at the Gresham, Delaney was having second thoughts. She'd laid out 3 different outfits on the bed and couldn't decide between them. Too dressy sent the wrong message. Too casual seemed disrespectful of the effort he was making. Too materno made her feel invisible. Finally, she settled on a soft emerald green dress that brought out her eyes. Simple, elegant, with 3/4 sleeves that would work for nursing if needed. She paired it with comfortable heels and minimal jewelry. The effect was polished but approachable, beautiful, but not trying too hard. Emery was being unusually cooperative, content to play with her favorite stuffed elephant while Delaney got ready. It was as if her daughter somehow sensed the importance of the evening. "You're going to meet an old friend of Mummy's tonight," Delaney told her as she packed the diaper bag. "Someone who knew me before you were born, before everything changed." She paused, looking at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back was different from the one Rowan had known 3 years ago. Older, yes, but also stronger, more confident in some ways, more cautious in others. Motherhood had changed her fundamentally. She was fiercer now, more protective, but also softer in unexpected places. Would he like who she'd become? More importantly, did it matter if he did? Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Cassie, her neighbor in Portland who helped with childcare. "How's London?" Cassie asked cheerfully. "And how's our little world traveler?" "Good, we're both good." Delaney hesitated, then found herself saying, "Cassie, can I ask you something?" "Of course. If someone from your past showed up unexpectedly, someone you'd loved but lost touch with, and they seemed different, changed for the better, would you give them another chance?" There was silence on the other end, then Cassie's gentle laugh. "Honey, are you asking me this for academic purposes, or did you run into someone on that plane?" The latter, someone important." Delaney looked down at Emery, who was watching her with those impossibly blue eyes. "Very important. Once upon a time. Then my advice is this: trust your instincts, but protect your heart. You've rebuilt your life beautifully, Delaney. Don't let anyone, no matter how much history you have, make you forget how strong you are." After hanging up, Delaney felt steadier. Cassie was right. She was strong now in ways she'd never been before. She could handle one dinner with Rowan Castell. She could enjoy his company, appreciate the man he seemed to have become, and still maintain the boundaries that kept her and Emery safe. At 7:45, she gathered Emery in the diaper bag and headed downstairs. Rowan was waiting in the lobby, and when he saw them approaching, his face lit up with genuine joy that made her heart skip. He was dressed casually but perfectly, and he looked nervous, which was strangely endearing coming from a man who commanded boardrooms and built empires. "You look beautiful," he said simply, then immediately knelt down to Emery's level. "And you look like the prettiest girl in London." Emery rewarded him with her biggest smile and reached for his face with both hands. Watching them together, Delaney felt something loosen in her chest, not her guard dropping entirely, but shifting slightly. "Shall we?" Rowan offered his arm. As they walked out into the London evening, Delaney couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing at a crossroads. One path led back to her safe, predictable life in Portland. The other lead into unknown territory with a man who'd broken her heart once, but might have learned enough to protect it this time. The question was, which path would make her happy, and which would keep her safe? Sometimes she was beginning to realize those weren't the same thing. The next morning arrived, gray and drizzling. Typical London weather that matched Delaney's conflicted mood. She'd barely slept, replaying every moment of dinner with Rowan, every gentle touch as he'd held Emery, every word that had chipped away at the walls she'd built around her heart. Her phone buzzed with a text at 9 a.m. sharp. "Good morning. Would you and Emery like a proper London day? I promised to behave myself. R." She stared at the message for 10 minutes before responding. "What did you have in mind? Something you'd actually enjoy?" "Trust me." Against her better judgment, she found herself typing. "One day, but we take things slow, slower than a glacier. I'll pick you up at 11 o'clock. At exactly 11 o'clock, Rowan appeared in the hotel lobby wearing dark jeans, a charcoal sweater, and a smile that made her stomach flutter. Despite her resolve to keep things simple, he traded his usual luxury sedan for a family-friendly Range Rover, complete with a professionally installed car seat. "You bought a car seat?" Delaney asked, incredulous. "I had one installed." "There's a difference." His grin was boyish. "I also researched the top 5 baby-friendly attractions in London and planned a route that includes 3 coffee shops with excellent changing facilities." "You researched baby-friendly attractions extensively. Did you know that the Natural History Museum has special quiet hours for families with small children? We're going during one of them." Delaney felt something warm unfurl in her chest. The old Rowan would have planned champagne tastings and exclusive gallery viewings. This Rowan had spent his morning researching how to entertain a 9-month-old baby. "Why the Natural History Museum?" she asked as they settled Emery into her new car seat. The baby cooing happily at the upgraded accommodation because you loved dinosaurs when we were together. You dragged me to every paleontology exhibit in Chicago. His voice was soft with memory. You said they made you feel connected to something bigger than yourself. The fact that he remembered such a small detail about her interests made her chest tighten with emotion. I can't believe you remember that. I remember everything about you, Delaney. That's been my problem. The museum was perfect. Less crowded than usual with plenty of space for Emery's stroller. As they wandered through the dinosaur gallery, Rowan carried the baby, pointing out different fossils and making exaggerated expressions that sent her into peals of laughter. Look, Emery, he said, bouncing her gently in front of a massive T-Rex skeleton. That's what Daddy looks like before his morning coffee. The word Daddy slipped out so naturally that it took a moment for the full impact to hit both adults. Delaney froze and Rowan's face went pale as he realized what he'd said. I'm sorry, he said quickly. I didn't mean, I wasn't trying to. It's okay, Delaney said quietly, but her voice was shaky. She doesn't understand. But the moment had shifted. Something between them made the hypothetical suddenly feel very real. They continued through the museum in a new kind of silence, both acutely aware of how they must look to other visitors like a young family, like three people who belonged together. After the museum, they found themselves in Hyde Park. Despite the continuing drizzle, Rowan had produced an umbrella large enough to shelter all three of them as they walked slowly along the Serpentine. Emery, fascinated by the ducks and swans. Tell me about Portland, Rowan said as they found a covered bench where Delaney could feed Emery. What's your life like there? Quiet, small apartment near the university where I work. There's a coffee shop on the corner where the barista knows Emery's name. She smiled sadly. It's exactly the kind of simple life you used to say would bore you to death. It sounds perfect. It's safe, she corrected. There's a difference. They sat in comfortable silence as Emery had her bottle, watching other families navigate the park despite the weather. A jogger passed them, splashing through puddles with determination. A young couple shared an umbrella, laughing as they tried to keep their takeaway coffee dry. Delaney, Rowan said suddenly, his voice serious. I need to tell you something. Something in his tone made her look up sharply. What? I know about Oliver. The words hit her like ice water. What do you mean you know about Oliver? I mean I know who he was. I know about the accident, about his parents, about the scholarship fund they started at Northwestern in his memory. Rowan's voice was careful, gentle. I hired a private investigator 2 years ago. You what? The fury in her voice was immediate and cold. I was worried about you. After we broke up, I couldn't stop thinking about whether you were okay, whether you were happy. I told myself I just wanted to know that you'd moved on, that you were building the life you wanted. So, you had me investigated. Each word was precisely enunciated, deadly quiet. I called it off as soon as I found out about the accident, as soon as I realized what you'd been through. He turned to face her fully. But yes, for about 3 weeks, 2 years ago, I violated your privacy because I was selfish and couldn't let go. Delaney carefully placed Emery back in her stroller, her movements controlled but trembling with anger. You had no right. I know, I mean it, Rowan. You had no right to spy on my life, especially after what I'd been through. You're absolutely right. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. Sorry. She stood up abruptly, her voice rising despite their public location. I trusted you tonight. I told you about Oliver, about losing him, about struggling alone with Emery, and the whole time you already knew it wasn't like that. Then, what was it like? Her brown eyes flashed with a pain that went deeper than anger. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you used information you had no right to have to manipulate me into opening up to you. No, Rowan stood as well, his own voice becoming urgent. Delaney, I didn't bring up Oliver. You told me because you chose to trust me. The investigator's report was just facts, dates, places, public records. It told me nothing about how you felt, what you went through, how you survived. Only you could tell me that. But you let me think you were hearing it for the first time, because I was. The facts aren't the story, Delaney. Your pain, your strength, your love for Emery, the way you rebuilt your life, none of that was in any report. That was all you, trusting me with your truth. She stared at him, conflict wearing in her expression. Part of her understood what he was saying, but the violation of privacy, the deception by omission, felt like a betrayal at the worst possible moment. I need space, she said finally. I need to think. Of course, I'll drive you back to the hotel. No. She was already reaching for Emery's stroller. We'll take the two. I need some time alone. Delaney, please don't. She held up a hand to stop him. Just don't. I'll call you tomorrow. As she walked away through the drizzling rain, maneuvering Emery's stroller with practiced efficiency, Rowan remained on the bench feeling like he'd just destroyed the best thing that had happened to him in years. He'd been honest, finally, about his past mistakes, but honesty, he was learning, didn't automatically equal forgiveness, and now he had less than 24 hours to figure out how to prove to the woman he loved that his feelings were real, not based on information he'd gathered in secret, but on the extraordinary person she'd become, despite everything life had thrown at her. The rain began falling harder, but Rowan didn't move. He sat alone on the bench, watching the space where Delaney and Emery had disappeared, wondering if he'd just lost them forever. This time, entirely through his own stupidity. Delon's hotel room felt suffocating despite its elegant proportions. She'd spent the afternoon pacing between the window and Emery's travel crib, replaying every moment of the past 2 days, questioning every emotion, every softened defense, every moment she'd allowed herself to hope. Emery, blissfully unaware of the adult drama swirling around her, played contentedly on the bed with her stuffed elephant, occasionally looking toward the door as if expecting someone specific to walk through it. "He's not coming, sweetheart," Delaney whispered, though the words felt like glass in her throat. Her phone had buzzed 6 times with messages from Rowan. She'd read them all, but couldn't bring herself to respond. "I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness. I made a terrible mistake 2 years ago, and an even worse one, by not telling you immediately. You deserved honesty from the beginning. Please don't let my stupidity ruin what we could have. I love you. I've loved you for 3 years through every mistake, every regret, every empty day without you. If you can find a way to forgive me, I'll spend the rest of my life earning your trust." The last message had arrived an hour ago, and the silence since felt ominous. Part of her wanted to call him, to scream and cry and demand explanations. Another part wanted to pack immediately and catch the first flight back to Portland, back to her safe, predictable life, where no one could hurt her with good intentions and terrible judgment. But the largest part of her, the part she was afraid to acknowledge, just missed him, missed the way he'd looked at Emery with such natural tenderness, missed the careful way he'd planned their day around what would make them both happy, missed the man he'd become during their years apart. A soft knock interrupted her spiral of thoughts. For a wild moment, her heart leaped, thinking it might be Rowan. Instead, she opened the door to find a hotel staff member, with a large basket wrapped in cream-colored ribbon. "Delivery for Ms. Wren," the young woman said with a professional smile. Delaney accepted the basket with confusion, tipping the staff member before closing the door. The basket was beautiful, filled with gourmet baby food, organic teething biscuits, a soft cashmere blanket, and an elegant wooden rattle. Nestled among the items was a small envelope with her name written in Rowan's distinctive handwriting. "For Emery, because she deserves beautiful things regardless of what her mother decides about her stubborn, foolish, almost Uncle Rowan. RPS. The blanket is from a sustainable textile company in Scotland. I thought you'd appreciate knowing the providence." Despite everything, Delaney found herself smiling through tears. Even in his apology, he was thinking about her values, her preferences, what would matter to her. The fact that he'd called himself almost Uncle Rowan made her chest ache with longing. Emery crawled over to investigate the new gifts, immediately gravitating toward the wooden rattle. As she shook it delightedly, the soft, chiming sound filled the quiet room, and Delaney made a decision. She needed to see him one more time before her flight tomorrow. Not to forgive him. She wasn't ready for that, but to understand. Meanwhile, 3 miles away in his Mayfair penthouse, Rowan stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows, watching London's skyline blur through the rain. He'd changed clothes twice, paced his office for hours, and contemplated flying to Portland just to have the chance to gravel properly on her doorstep. His assistant had called twice about urgent business matters. He'd ignored both calls. For the first time in his adult life, business felt completely irrelevant compared to the possibility of losing Delaney forever. The private investigator incident had been a moment of weakness 2 years ago. Born from sleepless nights and whiskey-fueled regret, he'd convinced himself he just wanted to know she was happy, that seeing evidence of her successful new life would help him move on. Instead, learning about Oliver's death had nearly broken him, not from jealousy, but from the devastating knowledge that she'd suffered so profoundly while he was living his shallow existence. Completely unaware, he'd fired the investigator immediately and spent the next 6 months in what could only be described as a depression. That was when the real changes had started. Selling the yacht, declining invitations, staying home in Chicago for weeks at a time, trying to become the kind of man who deserved a woman like Delaney Wren. His phone rang, jolting him from his thoughts. He grabbed it without checking the caller ID, hoping desperately to hear her voice. Rowan. It wasn't Delaney. It was his sister, Cassandra, calling from New York. Cass, this isn't a good time. When is it ever a good time with you? Listen, I know you're in London, and I know you're probably drowning in work, but I need to tell you something important. Can it wait? No, it really can't. Her voice grew serious. Mom had some chest pains yesterday. She's fine, she added quickly, hearing his sharp intake of breath. The doctors say it was just stress and anxiety. But Rowan, she's been worried sick about you. About me. Why? Because you've been different for the past 2 years. Quieter, more isolated. She thinks you're depressed. And honestly, so do I. When's the last time you brought someone home for dinner? When's the last time you seemed genuinely happy about anything? Rowan closed his eyes. His family had noticed his changes, but he'd thought he'd been hiding his struggles better. I'm not depressed, Cass. I've just been figuring things out. Figuring what out? How to be the kind of man worth loving. The honesty in his voice made his sister pause. When she spoke again, her tone was gentler. Rowan, what's really going on? And don't give me some corporate answer about reassessing priorities. So he told her everything about Delaney, about their relationship and breakup, about seeing her on the plane, about Emery, about the investigator, about falling in love with a life he'd never thought he wanted. Jesus, Rowan, Cassandra said when he finished, you hired a private investigator to spy on your ex-girlfriend. I know how it sounds. It sounds like something our father would have done. The comparison hit like a physical blow. Their father had been controlling, manipulative, someone who used money and information as weapons. It was exactly what Rowan had spent his adult life trying not to become. That's not who I am, he said quietly, isn't it? Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you tried to control a situation, instead of just being honest about your feelings. You're right. The admission felt like swallowing glass. I was a coward. I am a coward. No, you're an idiot. There's a difference. Her voice softened. But you're an idiot who's genuinely in love for the first time in his life. That's got to count for something. Not if she can't forgive me, then you fight for her forgiveness. You don't give up and retreat back into your safe, empty life. You fight. After ending the call, Rowan sat in the growing darkness of his penthouse, his sister's words echoing in his head. She was right. He'd spent 3 years becoming a better man, but the moment he'd been tested, he'd fallen back on old patterns, trying to control the situation instead of trusting in genuine connection. His phone buzzed with a text message. His heart stopped when he saw Delon's name. Can you come to the hotel? We need to talk. He was out the door before he'd even finished reading the message. In her hotel room, Delaney sat on the bed with Emery in her lap, both of them playing with the wooden rattle. She'd made her decision, but she had no idea if she was brave enough to follow through with it. All she knew was that tomorrow she'd be on a plane back to Portland, back to her careful, safe life. And if she was going to take that step backward, she owed it to herself and to him to make sure she wasn't walking away from something real, just because she was too afraid to risk being hurt again. Love, she was learning, required as much courage as it did feeling. And despite everything, she was still brave enough to love Rowan Castell. Rohan arrived at the Gresham Hotel within 20 minutes, his hair damp from the rain, his usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled from his urgent journey across London. When Delaney opened the door to her suite, they stood facing each other in silence for a long moment, the weight of everything unspoken hanging between them like a live wire. Thank you for the gifts, she said finally, stepping aside to let him enter. Emery loves the rattle. As if summoned by her name, Emery crawled over from where she'd been playing on the carpet, pulling herself up on Rowan's legs and babbling happily. The sight of her unreserved joy at seeing him again nearly undid both adults. Hello, beautiful, Rowan said softly, scooping her up automatically. The baby immediately began playing with his collar, completely oblivious to the tension in the room. We should talk, Delaney said, settling into one of the suite's armchairs. Really talk this time. Rowan remained standing, bouncing Emery gently as she contentedly explored his watch. I know you have every right to hate me. I don't hate you. Her voice was quiet, tired. I'm angry. Yes, I feel betrayed. Absolutely. But I don't hate you, Rowan. And that's part of the problem. Tell me what you're thinking, please. Delaney studied his face, the genuine remorse in his green eyes, the careful way he held her daughter, the man he'd become, overlaying the man she'd once loved. I've been thinking about why you hired that investigator. Not the surface reasons, but the real ones. I told you. You told me you wanted to know if I was happy, but I think it was more than that. She leaned forward slightly. I think you were punishing yourself. The observation hit him with unexpected force. What do you mean? You'd convinced yourself that leaving me was the right choice, that I was better off without you. But you couldn't quite believe it, could you? So, you had someone watch my life, hoping to find proof that you'd made the right decision. Rowan went very still. Emery's soft babbling the only sound in the room. Maybe, he admitted finally. And when you found out about Oliver, about my happiness with him, it confirmed what you thought you wanted to know, that I could love someone else, build the life I'd wanted, be better off without you. Yes, the word was barely a whisper. But then he died. Delaney's voice grew stronger, more certain, and suddenly you realized that my happiness had been destroyed. And you couldn't use my successful new life as justification for your choices anymore. You had to face the fact that you'd walked away from something real. And now I was suffering, and you weren't there to help. Rowan closed his eyes, the accuracy of her assessment like a knife to his chest. You're right. All of it. I was a coward who couldn't face what he'd given up. So, I tried to convince myself it was noble, that you were better off without me. And when that illusion was shattered, you started changing, really changing, not just talking about it. How do you know that? Because the man who walked away from me 3 years ago would never have spent his morning researching baby-friendly attractions. He would never have bought a car seat or remembered that I loved dinosaurs. He would never have sat still long enough to have this conversation. She paused. The man I fell in love with was always in there, Rowan. He just needed a reason to surface. The room fell quiet, except for Emery's happy gurgling as she played with Rowan's shirt buttons. He looked down at her, this perfect little person who had somehow become central to his hopes for the future. Then back at Delaney. I love you, he said simply. Not the memory of you, not the idea of you, but you, the woman you are right now with all your strength and scars and the way you love this little girl with your whole heart. I love how you've built a life from grief, how you've become even more beautiful because of what you've survived. Tears slipped down Delaney's cheeks. And I love you, the you that you've become. But love isn't enough, Rowan. We proved that 3 years ago. What else do you need? I need to know that when things get hard, and they will get hard, you won't run. I need to know that when the novelty of domestic life wears off, you won't start looking for the exit. As she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, most importantly, I need to know that you're choosing this life because it's what you truly want, not because you're trying to atone for past mistakes. Rowan carefully transferred Emery to her mother's arms, then knelt on the floor in front of Delaney's chair, taking her free hand in both of his. 3 years ago, I thought freedom meant keeping my options open, never committing fully to anything or anyone because there might be something better around the corner. His voice was intense, focused entirely on her face. I was wrong. Real freedom is choosing something, someone, and meaning it completely. It's building something lasting instead of always chasing the next adventure. Pretty words, more than words. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Delaney's breath caught. Rowan, no, let me finish. He didn't open the box, just held it between them. This ring belonged to my grandmother. She wore it for 62 years of marriage to a man who chose her every single day. Through war and poverty, and the death of a child and everything else life threw at them. Delaney stared at the box, her heart racing. I'm not asking you to marry me tonight. I'm not asking you to forgive me immediately, or trust me blindly, or uproot your life in Portland. He set the box carefully on the coffee table between them. I'm asking you to let me prove that I'm the man who deserves this ring. Let me court you properly. Let me show up consistently, reliably for you and for Emery. Let me earn the right to be part of your family. How? She whispered. I'll move to Portland. I'll work remotely, fly back for essential meetings, but my primary residence will be wherever you and Emery are. I'll learn every detail of your routine, every preference, every fear. I'll be there for the 2 a.m. feedings and the teething episodes and the first steps and the bad days, when grief sneaks up on you. Emery, sensing the emotional intensity in the room, reached for Rowan from her mother's arms. Without thinking, Delaney let him take her again, and the baby immediately settled against his chest as if she belonged there. And if you decide after I've proven myself that you can trust me with your heart again. He looked down at Emery, then back at Delaney. I want to adopt her legally. I want to be her father in every way that matters. Not to replace Oliver's memory, but to give her the security of knowing she'll always have someone who will fight for her happiness. The words broke something open in Dellen's chest. This wasn't the grand romantic gesture of the old Rowan, full of flash and dramatics. This was quiet, profound, practical love. The offer to do the daily work of being a family, to choose them, not just in the emotional moments, but in the ordinary ones too. You would do that? She asked, her voice thick with tears. Really adopt her in a heartbeat. She's already mine, Delaney. I don't need biology to make that real. He shifted Emery to his shoulder, patting her back with practiced ease. I know you need time. Take all the time you need, but please don't close the door completely. Let me try. Delaney looked at them. This man who had broken her heart and spent 3 years rebuilding himself, holding her daughter with such natural love, and felt the last of her defenses crumble. 6 months, she said finally. What? 6 months? You can move to Portland. We can see how this works. But no promises, no expectations. You prove yourself through actions, not words. And if at any point I feel like you're not fully committed, or if Emery becomes attached and I think you might leave, she met his eyes directly. I will end this completely. No second chances, no explanations. I won't let you break her heart the way you broke mine. Understood. Relief flooded his features. 6 months, I'll take it. And therapy for both of us, together and separately. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. Yes, absolutely. Emery had fallen asleep against his shoulder, completely trusting and peaceful, looking at her daughter in the arms of the man she'd never stopped loving. Delaney felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope for a future that included not just survival, but joy. This is terrifying, she admitted. For me, too. He reached for her hand with his free one. But some things are worth being terrified for. Outside, London continued its eternal dance of rain and light. But inside the hotel suite, 3 people who had found each other across years of pain and growth, sat in the quiet, understanding that love, real love, was rarely easy, but always, always worth the fight. Tomorrow, Delaney would fly back to Portland, and in 2 weeks, Rowan Costell would follow her, ready to trade his kingdom of endless horizons for the deeper adventure of building a home. The coffee shop on Burnside Street had become their sanctuary. Every Tuesday and Friday morning at 9 a.m., Delaney would arrive with Emery in her stroller, order her usual lavender latte, and settle into the corner booth by the window. And every Tuesday and Friday, Rowan would appear exactly 15 minutes later with his black coffee and whatever pastry had caught his eye, sliding into the seat across from her like he'd been doing it forever. Today marked exactly 6 months since their agreement in London. 6 months of careful courtship, consistent presence, and the slow rebuilding of trust that had been shattered years ago. She's walking more steadily, Rowan observed, watching 15-month-old Emery toddle between their table and the counter, charming every customer and barista in her path. Her confident little steps and infectious giggle had made her the unofficial mascot of the cafe. Yesterday, she walked from the kitchen to the living room without falling once, Delaney said, pride evident in her voice. I think she was showing off because she knew you were coming for dinner. Smart girl. She knows I bring the good snacks. Their easy banter had taken months to develop. In the beginning, every conversation had felt loaded with unspoken questions. Are you staying? Can I trust this? Will you run when it gets hard? But gradually, day by day, dinner by dinner, bedtime story by bedtime story, Rowan had proven himself in ways both large and small. He'd been there for Emery's first ear infection, pacing the apartment at 3 a.m. while she cried inconsolably. He'd learned to make her favorite foods, had child-proofed his downtown Portland apartment, and knew exactly which stuffed animals she needed for comfort. When Delaney had come down with the flu in month 3, he'd taken a full week off work to care for both of them, proving that his commitment went far beyond the romantic moments. How was therapy yesterday? Delaney asked, referring to his individual sessions with Dr. Martinez. Good, hard, but good. We talked about control patterns again. Rowan's willingness to examine his past behaviors had been one of the most encouraging signs of genuine change. She thinks I've been using work as a way to avoid dealing with emotions for most of my adult life. Shocking revelation, Delaney said with gentle teasing. I know, right? Who could have seen that coming? His self-deprecating smile had become one of her favorite things about this new version of him. What about you? How are your sessions going? Dr. Chun thinks I'm ready to start talking about the future instead of just processing the past. She paused, meeting his eyes directly, Which brings us to today's conversation. The air between them shifted, becoming charged with anticipation. They both knew this day would come. The end of their 6-month trial period, the moment when they'd have to decide whether this careful rebuilding had worked. Emery, sensing the change in atmosphere, abandoned her exploration of the cafe and climbed into Rowan's lap, settling against his chest with the complete trust that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. "I have something for you," Delaney said, reaching into her purse. She pulled out a small wrapped package, her hands slightly trembling as she placed it on the table between them. Rowan looked surprised. "It's not my birthday. It's not that kind of gift." "Open it." Inside the wrapping was a simple wooden picture frame containing a photograph neither of them had seen before. It showed the three of them, from 2 weeks ago, taken by Delaney's neighbor during a spontaneous picnic in Laurelhurst Park. Rowan was lying on a blanket, Emery crawling over him while he laughed, and Delaney was sitting beside them, her face radiant with genuine happiness. But it wasn't the photograph that made Rowan's breath catch. It was what was written in Dellen's careful handwriting across the bottom of the frame. "Rowan Delaney and Emery Castell, a family." "Delaney," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I had the adoption papers drawn up last week," she said, her own voice unsteady. "If you still want to, if you're still sure." Instead of answering immediately, Rohan carefully lifted Emery and turned her to face him. The little girl, now walking and babbling constantly, looked at him with those bright blue eyes that had captured his heart from the moment he'd met her. "Emery Rose," he said solemnly, using the full name Delaney had given her. "Would you like me to be your daddy? Your real forever, never going anywhere, daddy." Emery, who had recently learned to clap, broke into applause and shouted, "Duh," with perfect clarity, the word she'd been practicing for weeks, but had never said directly to him before. The sound broke something open in both adults. Rowan pulled Emery close, burying his face in her soft curls, while Delaney wiped tears from her cheeks. "Is that a yes?" he asked Emery, who responded by grabbing his nose and giggling. "From both of us," Delaney said softly. "That's a yes from both of us." Rowan reached across the table and took her hand, the simple touch electric. "After months of careful boundaries and slow rebuilding, I have something for you." He pulled the small velvet box from his jacket pocket, the same box from that night in London, 6 months ago. But this time when he opened it, the ring inside seemed to catch every ray of morning sunlight streaming through the cafe windows. "Delaney Wren," he began, then stopped, emotion overwhelming him. "6 months ago, you gave me the greatest gift anyone has ever given me, the chance to prove I could be the man you both deserve. You let me earn your trust day by day, moment by moment. You taught me that love isn't about grand gestures or perfect timing. It's about showing up consistently, especially when it's hard." Other cafe patrons had begun to notice what was happening, conversations quieting as they realized they were witnessing something profound. "You've watched me change diapers at 2 a.m. and listened to me read the same bedtime story 17 times in a row. You've seen me at my most vulnerable and still chose to let me stay." He looked down at Emery, who was now trying to grab the shiny ring box. "Both of you have made me into someone I actually like being." "Rowan," Delaney whispered, "I'm not the same man who was too afraid to stay still 3 years ago. I'm not even the same man who begged you for a chance 6 months ago. I'm the man who knows that every adventure worth having is right here in this moment with you and our daughter." "Our daughter." The words hung in the air like a promise. "Will you marry me, Delaney? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that the best journey isn't to some exotic destination? It's the daily adventure of loving you and raising Emery and building something real together." Through her tears, Delaney saw everything she'd ever wanted reflected in his green eyes. Not the reckless passion of their youth, but something deeper, steadier, more precious. The promise of ordinary mornings and shared responsibilities, of someone who would stay when things got difficult, of a partner who chose their small, beautiful life over all the excitement the world had to offer. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, of course, yes." The ring slid onto her finger, as if it had been waiting there all her life. Around them, the cafe erupted in spontaneous applause, strangers celebrating the love story they just witnessed. But Rowan and Delaney only had eyes for each other and the little girl in his arms who was clapping enthusiastically, not understanding the magnitude of the moment, but sensing the joy surrounding her. "When?" Rowan asked, kissing her hand where the ring now rested. "Soon," Delaney said, reaching over to brush a tear from his cheek. "But small, simple, just us and Emery, and the people who matter most. Perfect." He shifted Emery so he could lean across the table and kissed Delaney properly. Their first real kiss in over 3 years. Tasting of coffee and tears, and the promise of all their tomorrows. When they broke apart, Emery was looking at them with wide-eyed fascination, as if she understood that something fundamental had just changed in her small world. "What do you think, sweetheart?" Delaney asked her daughter. "Are you ready for Mama and Dada to get married?" Emery's response was to clap harder and shout, "Dada, Mama," while trying to grab both their faces at once. As they sat in their corner booth, the Portland morning sun streaming through the windows and illuminating their joined hands, all three of them knew they had found something rare and precious. A love built, not on passion alone, but on choice, commitment, and the daily courage to keep choosing each other. The coastal tourism empire would continue to thrive. But Rowan had discovered that the greatest adventure of his life wasn't waiting for him in some distant country. It was right here, in a coffee shop in Portland, in the arms of a woman who had taught him that true freedom meant having somewhere and someone worth coming home to. And Delaney, who had rebuilt herself from grief and learned to love again despite every reason not to, had found her own adventure in trusting her heart one more time. Sometimes the best journeys don't take you away from home. Sometimes they bring you back to exactly where you belong. 2 years later, the beach house in Cannon Beach stretched along the Oregon coastline like something from a dream. Floor-to-ceiling windows faced the Pacific Ocean where waves crashed against Haystack Rock in an eternal rhythm that had become the soundtrack of their new life. It was their first real family vacation, and Rowan had chosen this place not for its luxury, but for its peace. 2.5-year-old Emery Rose Castell ran across the sand with the fearless abandon that only toddlers possess, her dark curls flying behind her as she chased seagulls. She wore a bright yellow raincoat over her play clothes, practical but adorable, exactly the kind of thoughtful choice that characterized every decision they made as parents. "Da, look," she shouted, holding up a perfect shell she'd discovered. Pretty Rowan, who was building an elaborate sandcastle with the kind of focused attention he'd once reserved for billion-dollar acquisitions, looked up and smiled. "That's beautiful, sweetheart. Should we add it to our castle?" "Yes, Mama. Come see." Delaney emerged from the beach house carrying a thermos of hot chocolate and wearing one of Rowan's old Columbia University sweatshirts over her sundress. At 30, she was more beautiful than ever, not just because of the way motherhood and marriage had given her a serene confidence, but because genuine happiness had erased the lingering shadows that grief had left around her eyes. "What did you find, baby?" she asked, settling onto the sand beside them and accepting the shell Emery thrust into her hands with typical toddler enthusiasm. "It's perfect," Delaney declared, examining the small treasure seriously. "Where should we put it on the castle?" As Emery and Rowan debated the optimal shell placement with the gravity of United Nations negotiators, Delaney found herself studying her husband's profile. He'd changed so much from the restless billionaire she'd first fallen in love with. His hair was slightly longer now, more relaxed, and he wore simple jeans and a cable knit sweater instead of his usual designer suits. But the biggest change was in his eyes. Gone was the constant search for the next adventure, replaced by deep contentment with exactly where he was. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, catching her watching him. "Just this: how different everything is from what I imagined 2 years ago. Better or worse? Impossibly better." Their wedding had been everything they'd promised each other. Small, simple, perfect. Just them, Emery, their immediate families, and a handful of close friends in the garden of their Portland home. Delaney had worn a flowing ivory dress that Oliver's mother had helped her choose, while Emery had served as both flower girl and ring bearer, toddling down the aisle with serious concentration. As she carried their wedding bands in a small basket, the adoption had been finalized 2 weeks before the wedding. Rowan had legally become Emery's father in a courthouse ceremony that had left all three of them in tears. The judge, a grandmother herself, had commented that she'd never seen a more natural family unit. "Mama," Emery said now, abandoning the castle to climb into Dellen's lap. "Read's story." "Which story, sweetheart?" "Oliver's story." Delaney's heart still caught slightly whenever Emery mentioned Oliver, but it was a sweet ache now, rather than the sharp pain it had once been. They'd made the decision early to tell Emery about Oliver, age appropriately, but honestly, he was the angel daddy who had loved her before she was born, while Rowan was the daddy who was here to love her every day. Once upon a time, Delaney began settling Emery more comfortably against her chest. There was a very kind man named Oliver who loved books and poetry, and your mama very much. He was so excited when he found out you were coming to join our family that he read to you every single night before you were born. It was a story they told many times, and Emery listened with the rapt attention she always gave to tales of the mysterious Oliver. Rowan had been the one to suggest they honor Oliver Unk's memory this way, understanding instinctively that loving Emery meant celebrating all the love that had brought her into the world. "Where Oliver now?" Emery asked, as she always did. "He's watching over us," Rowan said gently, pulling them both closer, "making sure we take good care of his special girl. And he's happy that you have Dada to love you every day," Delaney added, kissing the top of Emery Unka's head. This seemed to satisfy Emery, who snuggled deeper into their family huddle and began pointing out shapes in the clouds rolling across the Oregon sky. As the afternoon wore on, they built castles and collected shells and took dozens of photos with Delaney's old camera. Candid shots of Emery laughing, of Rowan teaching her to skip stones, of all three of them covered in sand and completely content. When the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold that would have done justice to any exotic destination Rowan had ever visited, they gathered on the beach house deck with takeout fish and chips, watching the waves and talking quietly while Emery dozed in Rowan's lap. "I got the final reports on the Santiago property today," Rowan mentioned, referring to his latest project, converting a historic monastery in Chile into a sustainable eco-resort that preserved both the building's heritage and the surrounding environment. "And we're officially fully booked for the next 18 months. The partnership with the local preservation society is working perfectly." He paused, stroking Emery's hair absently. "I've been thinking about expanding the heritage tourism program. There's a castle in Scotland that would be perfect for restoration." "Scotland?" Delaney raised an eyebrow. "That sounds suspiciously like travel." "Family travel," he clarified quickly. "The project would take about 6 months, but they have excellent schools for Emery, and there's a university library that would be perfect for your research." Delaney studied his face, looking for any trace of his old restlessness. Instead, she saw genuine excitement about sharing new experiences with them, about building their adventures together rather than seeking them alone. "You want to take a 2-year-old to Scotland for 6 months. I want to take my wife and daughter everywhere beautiful I've ever been, and show them all the places I never really saw because I was too busy running to appreciate them." He shifted Emery carefully, making sure she was comfortable in her sleep, "But only if it's what you want to. Only if it works for our family." Our family. Even after all this time, the phrase made Delaney's heart skip. "It might be nice," she admitted. "Emery's young enough that the change wouldn't disrupt her too much. And I have been wanting to research medieval manuscript preservation techniques, so that's a maybe." Let's talk about it more when we get home." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear over the Pacific, Emery sleeping peacefully between them, the sound of the waves providing a gentle lullaby. This, Delaney thought, was what happiness looked like. Not the dramatic passion of novels or movies, but this quiet contentment, this absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. "Thank you," Rowan said suddenly, his voice soft enough not to wake Emery. "For what?" "For giving me another chance, for trusting me with this." He gestured to encompass their daughter, their marriage, their life together. "For teaching me that the best adventures happen when you're brave enough to stay. Thank you for proving you were worth the risk." As they carried their sleeping daughter inside and settled her into the portable crib they'd brought for the weekend, both Rowan and Delaney reflected on the unlikely journey that had brought them to this moment. 3 years ago, a chance encounter on an airplane had set in motion a chain of events that had healed old wounds, created new love, and built a family from the ashes of separate heartbreaks. Later, as they stood on their bedroom balcony overlooking the moonlit ocean, Delaney in Rowan's arms and both of them listening to the soft sound of Emery's breathing through the baby monitor, they knew they had found something most people spend their entire lives searching for, a love that was both passionate and stable, adventurous and secure, built to last through whatever storms life might send their way. "I love you," Rohan whispered into her hair. "I love you, too," she whispered back. "All of you. This version, every version you've been, every version you'll become." And as they stood there together watching the waves dance in the moonlight while their daughter slept safely nearby, both of them understood that some fairy tales don't end with happily ever after. They begin with it. The Castell family had found their forever, and it was more beautiful than any destination either of them had ever imagined. In the end, the The greatest journeys aren't measured in miles traveled or stamped in a passport. They're measured in the courage to love deeply, the wisdom to choose commitment over convenience, and the faith to believe that home isn't a place. It's the people who choose to stay by your side through every season of life. Sometimes the most extraordinary adventure is simply learning to be extraordinary to someone else. What would you choose? A lifetime of thrilling destinations or a lifetime of coming home to the people who make your heart feel at peace? Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comment. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below, letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.